Hello, so today's video is about trigger perspectives. So a very popular term and a concern for people both as job seekers, employers, and employees is this idea of triggering. So whether that is you being triggered or you triggering someone else, it's something that needs to be discussed. And so, what we want to talk about is define triggers, uh, and we can define it as stimuli evoking emotional or behavioral responses. And the importance of this trigger awareness is for personal growth and exploring what is your response to both being triggered and perhaps triggering someone else. Studies show that 90% of individuals have experienced triggers that impact their emotions or actions. Okay, so triggers are the stimuli, as we say, that are evoking the emotional or behavioral response in individuals, and they can have a significant impact on the individual's emotions and actions, leading to strong reactions or behaviors. So this can be a big challenge in the workplace, either as someone who may be triggered or someone whose conversation might trigger someone else. So being aware of your own triggers is crucial for personal growth and emotional regulation. And recognizing these triggers enables individuals to gain a better understanding and effectively manage their responses. So often we can see the person who has been triggered often plays a blame game and says, you triggered me, it's your fault, how dare you? Now, this can be a challenge on both sides, right? I think we want to be careful about getting into this idea of whose fault it is. But in looking at this trigger response, we can certainly try to discover some tools for addressing it. So, let's use this as an example. So if you're walking around with a big flashing button on your chest that says push me, push me, push me, can you blame someone for pushing it? Probably not, right? Uh, now, can you blame someone for putting that button on your chest, right? So the experience that you had, the issue that you're being triggered is really what's to blame. So dealing with that is the most important issue, not walking around and being sensitive and telling people, don't trigger me, don't trigger me, don't trigger me. The issue is, why are you being triggered? What is the underlying issue? What is the emotion that you need to get to? Studies show that mindfulness interventions can help individuals become more aware of their triggers, leading to improved emotional regulation. So, a study by Chambers et al. In 2009 demonstrated that mindfulness training reduced emotional reactivity to triggers and improved overall well being. So, this idea that triggers can interrupt your daily work experience, interrupt the job environment, and cause you to maybe not progress in your employment, to not get that raise, to not be someone that people can feel like they can count on, I think is sort of a given. I think we can see that triggers can be an obstacle to performance and to growing within your job. So, importance of trigger awareness. So, this idea that there's this self awareness catalyst, we have to understand that for our own personal growth, our professional growth, we need to be aware of our triggers. Now, we also need to be aware what are sort of general things that can trigger people, right? So, let's think of Thanksgiving. Let's think of sitting around a table with our relatives. What are some of the things that might trigger, Uncle Joe or Aunt Mabel? Maybe we can say politics, religion, sensitive topics. Now, we're not trying to inhibit people's ability to express themselves. What we're trying to do is go back to a era, to a time when we thought about other people and we thought about what their reaction might be. It doesn't make their reaction your responsibility, but what you say and what you do is certainly your responsibility. So if you walk into a room and immediately start speaking about really controversial subjects, without forewarning, then I think you can take some responsibility for what happens afterwards, right? So let's look at the different perspectives. Let's try to understand what it means to sort of get in the mind of someone else, to try to feel the emotions, right? This idea of empathy, to try to explore the emotions that someone else might be feeling. So, what we're going to delve into are the various viewpoints on the triggering responses, highlighting the impact of perceptions and emotions. Diverse responses to triggers showcase different reactions to triggers, emphasizing how perceptions and beliefs influence those responses. We're going to look at a cognitive versus our emotional response. So, interpreting these triggering reactions. Triggers can evoke a wide range of reactions from individuals based on their unique perspectives, right? And their perceptions. So, if you have some emotional uh, issue, some history that is fairly recent, your propensity, the possibility of you being triggered is probably much higher. And knowing that about yourself can help you avoid those situations, can help you deal with those situations. So we need to look at our personal interpretation, our various reactions to triggering. We need to look at our cultural influences, psychological factors, social learning, and the environmental impact. So when we look at our uh, personal interpretations, individuals interpret triggers differently, leading to various responses. For example, a loud noise may cause one person to startle while another remains unfazed, right? This is a very good example. So if we think of someone with post-traumatic stress disorder, maybe they spent time in a war zone, either as a soldier or as a civilian, and a loud noise, an explosion, might elicit a response in them that it wouldn't in someone who hadn't had that experience, right? This is a very sort of easy thing we can all understand. Uh, Now, we can't necessarily control uh, the environment in a way, but if we know, if we're working in an office building and we know this about someone or they've disclosed this to us, and you know there's a construction site next door, you might take them aside and just say, hey, listen, there may be some loud noises, just so you're aware. Or if you're going to play a video that's loud or has gunshots, you can sort of warn that. We hear this in the news now when they're playing a video or they're playing some sound. They will often say this video has, gunshots, just to be, sort of full disclosure. It's just sort of the kind thing to do. So the idea of cultural influences, cultural backgrounds can play a significant role in trigger responses. In some cultures, direct confrontation may be common, while in others, avoidance is preferred. So, taking into account the cultural background of somebody can be, uh, we can avoid a trap. We can avoid that the sort of triggering trap where we know that something may trigger someone. We can sort of steer things in a different direction and be less confrontational or less direct in our interaction. Psychological factors like we said earlier about PTSD or anxiety. And this can be something, again, we know about someone or something we don't know about someone. As we become more comfortable speaking about mental health, we can then become more aware of uh, the different obstacles or challenges that people are facing in our workplace, in our home life, within our friendships. And this is one of the real benefits of breaking down those barriers to mental health awareness and speaking about what are some of the things that we are dealing with on a day-to-day basis, and that it's okay. It's okay to sort of self-identify those things and speak about them and say, listen, doesn't again, it's not about making something other people's responsibility. It's just about engaging people in the conversation and engaging them within uh, the workplace or the friendship or the family as to what we can all do to be respectful and to help each other. It's about helping, it's not about blaming. Social learning. Responses to triggers can be learned through observation and social interactions. So even when someone doesn't disclose something, you can sort of learn it as you observe them. And as you sort of see what's happening, and taking that on is a step in the direction of empathy. And that's sort of what we want. It's being emotionally intelligent, it's being socially aware, and that can make a big difference for those in your group that you're trying to lead. Environmental impact. The environment in which an individual encounters a trigger can influence their response. So, for instance, a crowded place may exacerbate anxiety compared to a quiet setting. So, we can't always adjust the setting to the person, but again, we can sort of give someone some warning to say, hey, just so you know, it's going to be kind of a busy space, maybe loud. So you may feel that it's okay to take a break if you need it. That kind of thing. Those kinds of sentences can give some relief to somebody that they know it's okay. So let's look at the cognitive versus emotional response. Reason, right? The cognitive idea, thinking about something versus feeling something. So cognitive responses involve rational thinking, while emotional responses are feelings driven. It's how we feel about something. Now, we often give more credence to something that's cognitive, something that's logical. Now, someone's feelings are what they are, right? Those are that person's feelings. We can't disregard it. Even if your feeling may not be rational, or it may be oversized depending on the based on the situation, we can't discount that feeling. That feeling is real to that person. So if they are fearful in that moment, even if rationally there's nothing to be afraid of, we need to at least give the credence, we need to give the respect to that person's feeling and understand that for them it is very, very real in that moment. Cognitive reactions rely on logic and analysis, where emotional reactions are influenced by emotion like fear, anger, or joy. So, in real life scenarios, we need to consider a situation where a person receives a negative feedback at work. This is a good example, sort of what might happen. Cognitive response may involve reflecting on the feedback, identifying areas for improvement, and creating a plan to address them. An emotional response, however, can manifest as a feeling of defensiveness, upset, being demotivated without considering the constructive aspect of the feedback. So, this is very important and really something that could happen. Uh, and what we can do as receivers of information is we can sort of check ourselves. Am I having an emotional response, or am I having a cognitive response? And you can balance, and both are valuable if we can recognize that both are valuable, right? If we only focus on one and devalue the other, then we're often in the weeds. We're not going to get anywhere. But if we can recognize both as being valuable, then we can find a balance between the two. Okay, so it's a little difficult to have interactive activities in sort of a YouTube video, but let's just sit and use it as a mindfulness experience, right? So we can look at interactive scenario exploration. So look at hands-on approaches. So explore triggers in action. So think in your own mind, what are some things that you've experienced as things that you've been told you're triggering someone, or you felt triggered in that moment? Think about how you reacted. Think about how other people react. I can give a short sort of anecdote. A few years ago, I was in my office speaking to someone in the office, someone who also worked there, just talking about an experience I had had recently. My dog passed away, and I was bringing the dog to the crematorium to have the dog cremated, so I could keep him in my home. So this is what I was doing, and I had uh, he had been sent there by the vet, and as I was going there to pick up the ashes, I uh, there were lots of employees of the crematorium dragging black bags through the parking lot. And I was just saying to this other person in the office, how unprofessional this seemed. It seemed like this is really upsetting, and it wasn't appropriate. And that, I mentioned it to those people so that they know that this is not, something that made me comfortable in the moment. It wasn't good business, I guess, in a sense. And so as I was telling the story, someone who was volunteering, was someone in our job readiness program, who turned to me very angrily and sort of shouted, "You need to stop." And I didn't understand. I was immediately sort of taken back by this response because I didn't understand what she was talking about. She told me I needed to stop talking about this story because it was triggering her. Her dog had just passed away. So, my immediate reaction to this was, I was having a private conversation with someone in my office and you happened to overhear, and I'm sorry that that triggered you. However, what each of us could have done about this differently is sort of what we can explore as sort of a role playing scenario, right? So, from my perspective, perhaps I could have been more sensitive to this person's reaction. From her perspective, she could have just left the room. There was nothing making her stay there for this conversation. She could have gone and taken a break. No one would have noticed, probably. Now, both of those are probably right. We both probably could have stepped a little bit outside of what we were doing and our feelings, if we want to be cognitive about it, and approach the situation differently. So this goes to the next uh, piece of the slide: personal responsibility, taking ownership of reactions. So I need to take ownership of what I did in the situation, and she needs to take ownership of what she did in the situation. And also, maybe some of it was how she said it. It wasn't about the emotion she was feeling, it was about the behavior she was showing me, yelling at me when it just sort of took me off guard. If she had said it sort of gently, like, oh, that must have been terrible. I know, my dog just passed away. It's really upsetting to me. That would have been a totally different reaction, and it would have focused less on her trigger and more on our shared emotion in that moment. Because I was saying this not as a joke, not as a funny anecdote. I was saying this as something that I found disturbing. So we could have actually shared an experience rather than butting heads over an experience. So consider the external influences, past experiences, and cultural factors, as we said before, are this idea of being confrontational or non-confrontational. Foster empathy in the moment. This is what I mean. If she had paid attention uh, to the emotion in what I was saying, um, and connected that through empathy to her own emotion, she may have understood better that we were actually on the same page about the story. That what I was saying was what was done was sort of terrible. And now this is my opportunity today with you in this video to reflect and learn about that scenario and that situation and how I could have done something differently and how she could have done something differently. We could have actually come together in terms of this. So, in looking at how we can uh, prepare ourselves for these kinds of things, because more and more, as we become comfortable speaking about mental health, we're going to encounter these kinds of discussions at work or in our family or within our friendships. So it's about being able to have a discussion about it, to looking about self awareness and regulation, understanding accountability for reactions, external influences, societal, media, environmental effects, and how those might change how we're dealing. Participants can consider external things like past experiences, societal norms, and cultural background that may impact a trigger response. Having some sort of empathy and understanding. This role playing can foster empathy as participants experience a different perspective. The one thing that role playing can help us with is it can help us practice an appropriate response. And this is often really important, especially for people whose emotions are really at the surface, that if they practice an emotional response that's appropriate, then they're more likely to use that. So if it becomes part of your natural dialogue, if you can ingrain that within your natural dialogue, then when something pops up, you can go to that cognitive space. And remember, let me say this, and then have your emotional reaction sort of privately so that it doesn't become an issue for everyone else as well as for yourself. This idea of trauma sensitivity promotion, um, being mindful of trauma triggers, uh, reflective, being reflective and learning from that. So encouraging self-reflection. So analyzing your personal triggers. Understanding personal triggers is essential for emotional intelligence and self awareness. It involves recognizing specific situations or stimuli that provide strong emotional reactions. So, knowing what triggers you or what triggers others is sort of an important thing. G.I. Joe, this toy used to have a tagline for their commercials. It was knowing is half the battle. So that's sort of the point with this is knowing what triggers you is half of the battle. Knowing what triggers other people around you is half of the battle. So if you're aware that something traumatic has happened in someone's life, it's kind to avoid those topics, right? That's just kindness. If you know what triggers you, it's just polite to try to not burden others with that, right? As well. So it's about this idea of trying to live within a society. We all have to get along. We all have to give up a little something so that we can get along and not just hammer our needs on other people. Okay, so if we look at the identifying triggers, we can start by listing situations that consistently lead to emotional responses. This can be like feeling criticized, ignored, or micromanaged. The emotional impact triggers often evoke intense emotions such as anger, fear, or sadness. Acknowledging these is crucial for effective trigger management and the most important thing, emotional regulation. How are you going to regulate your emotions? There's lots of different things you can do, and many of them are focused on mindfulness. So counting backwards or counting your breaths or feeling. This is the other thing that you can do is you can get outside of that emotional feeling by focusing on physical feeling. So if you're standing and you feel this happening, imagine feeling all 10 of your toes. And then imagine feeling the whole front of your foot and the middle of your foot and the back of your foot. And then imagine feeling your leg and sort of moving that feeling up until you get all the way to the top of your head. And by the time you do that, you're probably through this really critical stage of your emotion and you can sort of move past it. So, again, it's not ignoring the emotional impact, it's regulating the emotional impact. This is really an important difference. You're not trying to push the emotions down, you're trying to feel them, but in an appropriate way and with an appropriate response that pays attention to the situation. Okay, so now we're going to look at the reflect on the root causes. Encourage participants to dig deeper into the reasons behind their trigger response. So, how are you, why are you feeling this way? What is the thing that caused this feeling initially? And how can you get to the point where you're past that? This is a really important element. Uh, Understanding the patterns that are occurring in your life. And then you can manage your triggers strategically, develop those effective coping strategies. So it's all of these things together, identifying, acknowledging, reflecting, and managing. Okay, so identifying the triggers, you may have personal triggers, and these things may be based on past things. So, sometimes you will need some help with this. You may need a therapist, and you have to, again, be very honest with that therapist about, the past and what's occurred. There may be environmental triggers, considering these are external factors, right? Like loud noises or things like this. Uh, Perhaps if you track and analyze your emotional responses through a trigger log, you can then better understand and connect those things. So if you find yourself getting angry or having a strong emotional response, logging sort of what was happening at that time, you may be able to discover what the causes of those are. And then the idea of self awareness, how important it is to be self aware in order to manage your triggers proactively. Okay, this idea of promoting empathy. You need to focus on enhancing the understanding of diverse trigger responses to cultivate empathy and compassion for interpersonal interactions. We should all have empathy. We should all have compassion. Compassion for others and compassion for ourselves, and the ability to forgive ourselves when we don't live up to our own expectations. Storytelling for empathy present diverse trigger responses through stories that promote empathy and reflection on others' reactions. So again, this is this idea that you can sort of imagine what would happen and then look at sort of the different scenarios and the choices you can make that will lead to those different paths. So this is a powerful tool for fostering empathy because it allows you to step into others' shoes and understand their perspectives. Empathy is something that we need to practice. It's something we need to take time every day to uh, work on so that we can build this skill, we can build this muscle of empathy. Research by Brené Brown highlights the importance of vulnerability in storytelling for fostering empathy, and it allows individuals to connect on a deeper level and build stronger relationships. Case studies from conflict resolution programs demonstrate how sharing personal stories can lead to greater understanding and compassion among individuals with differing viewpoints. Encouraging people to reflect on the impact of empathy in interpersonal relationships can lead to improved communication. And again, if in the scenario that I gave, in the example I gave earlier, if we had just connected through empathy on the commonality that we had, there would have been less conflict, right? We had a commonality based on my story and the other person's feelings. And if we had connected on that, it would have been much better. So, activities for building empathy. Empathy building activities are really important for developing a better understanding of triggering responses and fostering empathy toward others. So, you need to change your perspective, right? This is really important. You have to view the trigger from various angles, as we did during the example. You have to create emotional awareness, recognizing emotions. So, having emotional awareness is very interesting because it takes both cognitive work and emotional work, right? We have to think, we have to put the emotion aside for a moment to bring ourselves outside of our own emotions to understand someone else's. And then we have to put ourselves back into an emotional space to sort of feel that emotion that that person is. So, it's really kind of complicated and something that takes practice, this idea of emotional awareness. This idea of role playing scenarios, playing out these scenarios in our head, we can experience these different perspectives firsthand. And then having group discussions that are honest and open so that we're aware of each other's strengths, obstacles, and can support each other better. Facilitating discussions is really important, and it's encouraging participants to share their insights and brainstorm for strategies. If we're meeting in a group and we can talk about scenarios that are separate from us, right? That are not involving our emotions, it's not an example from the group. We can all have some distance from the scenario. Then we can really be very objective about it and we can experience something different and then apply it to our own experience. So, this idea is that by sharing insights, participants share gained insights and challenges and create effective strategies for managing triggers in a safe and open manner. So, there's no danger of someone being impacted by it because we're using scenarios that are outside of our group that we can have a little bit more um, of perspective on. So, this idea of diverse insights, we're going to look at influential factors, the past experiences, the beliefs, and the stimuli. We're going to look at impact exploration, how our emotions and behaviors and personal experiences might impact us. And then we're going to look at the challenges about emotional reactivity, avoidance, and self regulation. So, these are the things that can help us understand how we deal with triggers and how other people do. And the blame game doesn't happen because we're looking at it from a very measured and strategic way. Proven strategies can then be shared through mindfulness, CBT, and emotional regulation. So then we can look at creating a supportive environment that emphasizes open discussions and mutual learning. Okay, so then we have strategies for trigger management, effective trigger management, understanding triggers, recognizing personal triggers for awareness, personal coping strategies, developing individualized coping mechanisms, peer support network, and a coping toolkit creation. All right, so now we'll just kind of wrap up with our summary of learnings. Our key learnings are understanding triggers impact. We have to recognize the emotional impact on interactions, and we have to create diverse perspectives to foster empathy and acknowledge varied trigger origins. And we need to have self reflection to enhance our personal growth and the growth of our community and the growth of our group, right? Empathy strengthens relationships. And if we look at it this way, if we don't look at it as a blame game, but we look at it as an opportunity to strengthen relationships, we can really create an inclusive work environment. So, embracing this diversity, seeing the unity in our differences, acknowledging the diverse trigger responses as natural, we can foster personal growth and understanding. We can embrace various reactions stemming from unique backgrounds and give some uh, celebrate, I guess, is a better way to say it, celebrate all of those things. So celebrate how we are different can create more unity within our group. So I think that when we look at this kind of discussion, a lot of it is about honesty, honesty with ourselves, honesty with others, and it's about creating a safe space. So we want to feel safe and we want others to feel safe. And in doing so, in being honest and having conversations, we can create that within our workplace, within our family, and within our relationships.